Hey everyone, welcome to a special edition of Live today. And I'm gonna do the second part of Aaron Kimberly. Sorry, I'm also gonna let you know I'm still dealing with this crazy cold, so I have this disgusting thing in my mouth, so I don't get all choked up. But I also want to wish you all and say I hope that you all had a great holiday with your family or friends or whatever you did. And thanks again for helping this channel grow. It means a lot to me. So this weird cold is going around, and I got mine from the kid a couple weeks ago, and it just doesn't seem to want to go away. Mostly, I have this weird cough. So I will try to mute my mic if I start to have a little bit of a coughing thing. But I have my green tea, I have my little suckers, I have my Kleenex, and I hope that we see Aaron here in a couple minutes. And the first part of the interview I did with, hey everybody, thanks for being here. The first part I did with Aaron Kimberly about a week or so ago was really amazing, and we lost connection with him. So it's why I decided to do a part two, because everybody seemed to really enjoy my conversation with her. And I might slip up on the pronoun thing. Hey friends, thanks for joining me. I might slip up a little bit on the pronoun thing because I know Aaron from before when Aaron was identifying as a male. So I do that he, she thing a lot. But Aaron's super cool with it. And, you know, I know all of you. So you're super cool with it too. We're not pronoun Nazis here. And it's just the reality of transition, and also the reality of why I think this conversation is important, because I'm gonna show you, and I'm really hoping that some young people join in on this live, or maybe watch it later, because what is so important about this particular. I'm gonna watch my phone to see if Aaron's having a hard time getting on again. But what I want to say is this: I think why this conversation is so important, because I really hope some young people who are even thinking of transitioning or not understanding the road that of commitment this takes, and to commit to it means to me a lifelong commitment. And not to say that Aaron's choice of what we like to call detransitioning isn't valid. Of course it is. But I also want you to see, now that Aaron has had like 13 or 14 years of transition time, he's now deciding to go back to living as a female, and he looks like me. And most of all the things that happened to Aaron within this 13 years of medical transitioning is never going to be reversed. And it's why a lot of us are pushing against the transitioning of young people, because they do not understand the long term, not only long term commitment, but that if you decide that you don't want to do this, you are going to be in a very, very, very difficult situation. So before I move forward, and hopefully Aaron, let me just check my phone. I just want to make sure Aaron's not having a hard time getting on like the last time. But thank you so much, everybody. I see you all. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you had an amazing holiday. And I really can't do this stuff without you. Let me just tell him I sent the link. Okay. He said he'll be right here. So I can't do this really without you. It means the world to me that you see that I'm not here to tell anybody how to live their life, especially an adult. But what I am here to do is to show you all that transsexual people do exist, and that this is a mental disorder, and that 100% it does need to be evaluated, and you need to take your time in this transition, and that you also never can lose sight of the fact that you will always be a biological male or female. I am a biological female, and I will never be nothing other than. That does not make me a bad person for saying that, and nor does it make it that you don't think people like me exist. So that's why you supporting this channel and supporting my voice in a very, very difficult fight, where we are trying to stop young people from doing what I have done and what Aaron has done. Because Aaron's going to show you that reversing this medical space, or even reversing your mental idea that you changed your sex, it's not easy, and nor will people accept you. They're not. A lot of people aren't accepting Aaron's choice of detransitioning on both sides of the coin. And so, oh, Merry Christmas to you all and Happy Holiday. And I hope you all really had a beautiful holiday with your family and friends. I did, just so you know, I took the time off and really, I'm really reconnected with my family. And I think you all know my backstory there. I had a very difficult time with my family for many years, but now I'm super close with my mother and my father. And I feel very blessed to have that relationship with them. So, and it's why when they tell you to get rid of your family, it's just unbelievable to me that they would do that. Hold on, I have Aaron here. Let me just add him to the stage. Hey, Aaron.
Hey there, Buck.
How you doing, my friend?
How are you doing?
I'm good.
I'm doing well. How are you doing? Happy
I'm
holidays.
excellent. I'm excellent. Holiday was
Merry
great. Had a great time
Christmas.
with my family. How about you?
It's been quiet. I spent some time with family, and I've just been spending time reading and just relaxing, chilling out, having a good time.
That's great. I've started reading a lot again, which has been really amazing. Like really getting away from the insanity and just finding, books to read has been really a blessing, for a lack of a better word. I
So
think we
hopefully
have a
we won't get cut off again. There seemed to be last time an error. It was an error of StreamYard communicating with YouTube, and it booted me off. Hopefully we won't have that problem again.
That's right. So mostly it's going to be about
Oh,
you and the floor. I think we have a little lag. So
okay.
let me just finish up here with everybody and tell
Yep.
them that you're here because they can see you. And I'm going to mostly give the floor to Aaron here today. And through the conversation, I'll kind of butt in and maybe ask a couple questions. And if I see you guys in the chat that you have something that I think is an important question, I'll ask Aaron. We're probably gonna. I'm dealing with this horrible cold, so I don't think a whole hour, but it depends. The conversation last time was so amazing. Um, so again, I appreciate Aaron for stepping up to the plate and having this amazing, beautiful conversation, and it's going to help a lot of people. And I'm just going to also ask the chat. Look, you don't have to agree with either Aaron or I, and you don't have to agree with Aaron's choices. And so I would appreciate if you just didn't make nasty comments because it just doesn't do any of us any good. And I will actually get rid of you. But if you have an opinion that says I don't agree with that, I'm cool with that, and I think Aaron is cool with that. We're adults. We're totally mature adults here. But we just don't like the hate and the nastiness. So if you're gonna be nasty, you might as well leave now, because you'll get kicked out. But if you're gonna have valid questions that push against the narrative here, I'm cool with that, and so is Aaron. So with that, I have Aaron today, and Aaron is gonna basically tell his story. But I think let's pick up where we left off, and I don't necessarily know if I remember specifically. You might, so please go ahead, Aaron.
I do. Yeah, I do. I reviewed what we talked about last time, and before we got cut off. So before we got cut off, we had been talking about social transition and how back in our day there had been a lot more discussion about the social and psychological aspects of transition. That it's not just medical. It's not just enough to take hormones and appear the opposite sex. I mean, we live in the world, and when we switch from appearing as one sex to the other sex, it changes how we move through the world.
Right.
We had also talked about how in the trans community there have always been there's lots of different communities within the trans. I hate the word community, but for lack of a better word, in the trans community, we're not all the same, right? And especially these days, we've gone off on so many different ideological tangents, and we seem to disagree about more things than we agree about these days. But there have always been two primary types of trans people: those for whom transition is like a subculture or a political statement, and I would call them disruptors. They're not interested in integrating into the world. They're very much interested in disrupting
Right.
social structures. And then there were those of us that just wanted to pass as the opposite sex and integrate to the best of our ability and get on with our lives. I wanted to tell you a story that kind of illustrates that, because going back to my early transition, I was on a listserv of trans men throughout the province of BC. And there was a young trans man very early in his transition, but starting to pass. And he was talking about seeing his doctor. And the doctor, as he was leaving, the doctor kind of slapped him on the back and said, "Hey, by the way, lay off the burgers," meaning you could afford to lose a few pounds.
Yeah.
In the listserv, the conversation immediately erupted in anger, saying that that doctor was fat phobic and what a bigot, and we need to start this phone call and letter writing campaign to correct this doctor.
Wow.
And I chimed in and said, "Has it occurred to you that the doctor was just trying to support your transition and was treating you like a dude? That is a very normal male to male interaction.
Right.
That male doctor probably does not slap his female patients on the back saying, 'Hey, lay off the burgers.'"
Right. Right.
But that is a very normal male to male interaction. And most men would not be angry about that because they are socialized to understand that
Right.
that's a normal interaction. And I said, so this doctor was probably trying to affirm your identity as male
Mm,
by
right.
interacting with you as he would any other male.
Great.
And when I said that, it seemed like everyone on that listserv was jumping on me, saying, and the moderator jumped in and saying that what I was saying was bigoted and that I was being heteronormative, and that's not, this is, all these words that get thrown around, that the disruptors spoke up, right? The
Hmm.
disruptors who weren't the least bit
Great.
interested in learning how to integrate into the world
Great.
just read me as, you're just trying to pretend to be an evil straight dude, and therefore, so they just shut that conversation down. The moderator actually said, "We are not going to continue this conversation." But the young person who posted that original question
Okay.
then piped in and said, "Actually, this has been a really helpful conversation for me."
Great.
Because it is our responsibility when we are wanting to just live in the world and integrate, we have to learn how to re-socialize. And
That's right.
this young person found it helpful to reframe that experience as, "Oh, well, actually, yeah, that doctor was just treating me like a dude. And I didn't pick up on that because I wasn't socialized male."
Excellent.
So I guess the point I wanted to illustrate is that the disruptors of our community, because they're the loudest, because they tend to be bullies,
Yeah.
they have had the reins of trans activism, for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
The fact that this moderator was one of these disruptors and shut that conversation down,
Mm,
which means that we weren't allowed to have a conversation about what are our responsibilities to re-socialize, to pick up on those cues, and to not have meltdowns when these are normal human interactions. That was a normal male to male interaction. We can't go through life having meltdowns every time somebody looks at us the wrong way or says something wrong. It's our responsibility to be sensitive to
mm,
those social cues and to start to adjust and learn how to
mm,
respond to those social cues.
mm.
But when the disruptors have the reins of all of these spaces and they shut those conversations down, we're not able to support one another to have those conversations about how do we do this in a way that's least disruptive to the world
That's right.
around us and that isn't causing us constant disruption. So that's the point I wanted to make is just how little support there is for
Well, it's
trans
great.
people.
First off, so many points you make are just so beautiful and very powerful. And what it does is it helps the people outside of our. So you and I are in alignment around community. I don't. But the community's insane, and that word is used very loosely here. But that being said, um, what you were saying before, which is we used to actually have a community where we cared about each other and we say, hey, wait a minute, now you're going to start to be a man. You are not a man. You are not socialized as a man. These are the things that are going to happen to you because we care about you and we don't want you to get your feelings hurt. And we want you to know when you want to be a man, these are the things that are going to happen in that space. And we helped each other sort of learn from, so the elders would go, hey, this is going to happen to you, buddy. Are you cool with that? Don't get your feelings hurt and cry like a girl. Even though that's really horrible to have to say, but that's the reality of the situation. So I love that you put it as disruptors, because they're disrupting what the whole point of transition was, which is to actually re-socialize ourselves so that we can live as the men we think we want to be, and to be in part of the world that way. And you can't walk around being this other way. Or so now that's why it is important to understand they don't want people to transition back into society. I feel like they want to disrupt society and use trans as a means and a way to disrupt whatever. I feel like it's a controlling, and I use this word again because I can't think of any other word because it just seems to identify with it so much, cult like. It does feel cult like to me.
It does to me too.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's scary.
And those of us that, I mean, I don't think I've ever been a part of that cult,
No.
because the disruptors had the reins in the early days.
Yes.
The handful of trans men that I became friends with, we were still friends 20 years later. We just split off into our own little social circle, and
That's right.
and
Yeah.
really have nothing to do with the larger trans community, just because it felt so toxic and we didn't feel like we were really allowed a voice. But
Totally.
in those
Yeah.
early days, there was a lot more support for trans men. In my early days, in your early days, you were probably one of the only ones. But in
It's
my day, there
difficult.
were enough of us that we were having conferences and workshops where we could, and
Yep.
some of those conferences didn't really appeal to some of the disruptors because we were sitting around in a circle talking about this kind of stuff, supporting one another through our transition to learn these skills. And I remember really early in my transition being at one of these conferences in Vancouver. We were sitting around in a circle just telling our stories. Most of us were coming out of the lesbian community. A lot of us were man-hating lesbians for many years. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, through your transition, did your opinion of men change when you started to move through the world passing as a man?
Great question. 100% it did. I would say that I had what we used to call penis envy for sure. And I definitely felt like lesser than. So men are this and men are that. And it's men's fault. And, I grew up in a very dominant, my father was a very domineering male. And so I had all these ideas that this is how men were. And so I most definitely was more, I would have considered myself one of those kind of man hating feminists for sure. And it really and I realized through my transition that it was my own self feeling jealous of wanting to be that. So I became jealous of it and I reacted to it in a more negative space. But as I started to become male and I started to, if for lack of a better expression, but express myself as a male person, I started to have more empathy and compassion towards men. And I started to be around men more. And I will always tell people this, it was gay men who helped me transition. There was no community back in the day. And the gay men were the ones who stepped up, saw me, were so cool with me, took me to the gym, helped me sort of learn masculine traits, if that makes sense. And I think that's a great point you make. I do think that especially back then, I think there was a lot of this man-hating feminist stuff. Did you come from that as well?
Yeah, I did. So, and I had a great conversation about this with my friend Kevin on my channel last week, because he also, came from lesbian spaces, and we were talking about how we were both coming out of the lesbian community when we transitioned and starting to occupy more space, appearing as a man, and how we had both been man-hating lesbians. Through my 20s, I was pretty much a lesbian separatist.
Right. Totally.
And at this conference, it was early in my transition. I was just barely passing at that point, and I felt very apologetic speaking in this circle about my masculinity and some of the men that I grew up with. My father was also very domineering. I grew up with a lot of very rough around the edges men who I never really felt comfortable with. They often infuriated me, and so I felt very apologetic talking to these trans men, and I think that was coming across. I was talking about my masculinity and the men I grew up with, and my dad's a cowboy. I grew up in a rodeo family, so a lot of cowboys, and we're very macho men, and so I mentioned, that I was basically raised by John Wayne and the Cowboys, and there was a older trans man behind me who must have picked up on that, my apologetic posturing, and he said,
Mhm.
"I love cowboys." And I remember feeling it kind of jarred me because, I remember thinking, "So that's an option? Like, it's an option? It's an option to like dudes?" Like, so I just
Totally.
assumed because we were all coming out of the similar lesbian spaces and often feminist spaces that we would all sort of have these sentiments of
Mhm.
carrying that man hating into our experience. And
Yeah.
when he said that, I wish I could track him down and thank him for that, because it planted this seed in my head that I could relax some of that,
Yeah.
that I could accept my own masculinity, which was just organic. I mean, that's
Totally.
that's a problem I had in a lot of lesbian feminist spaces over the years. Was I believe on paper and agree with them that women can be anything, right? Women,
Yep.
or girls can be highly effeminate, and then all the way through to very highly masculine. On
Yeah.
paper, that sounds perfect and beautiful. I
Mhm.
absolutely agree with that.
Mhm.
Organically, we just come into this world with certain personality traits or certain physical, you know,
Mhm.
certain physicality, and some of us are just more organically masculine,
Mhm.
sometimes to an extreme. I've known butch lesbians who, because of things like PCOS or other medical conditions, they have facial hair. They're
That's
very
right.
masculine. They look like men without taking any testosterone. They
Yep.
look like men.
Yep.
I wasn't quite at that extreme. I mean, because I have more, a smaller frame and more
Mhm.
finer features, but I did develop naturally facial hair, and I was
Mhm.
masculizing because I have an intersex condition that my testosterone levels were high.
Mhm.
So I would say, on that scale between 0 being highly feminine and 10 being so masculine he passes a man without taking any testosterone, I'd say I was at about a 9.
Wow. Wow.
And so despite on paper how, the feminists are advocating for that whole range of ways to be female, in our day-to-day reality, that wasn't really being applied. I mean,
That's right.
those of us that are on the extreme end of masculine, organically, we were often accused of, "You're just performing that
That's
masculinity,
right.
you just love men so much that you're trying to be a man, that you're,"
Mhm.
all these
That's right.
accusations that somehow we were rejecting our femininity, and that was
That's
a
right.
reason for why we were so masculine, which was never the case for me. And this is what Kevin and I were talking
Mhm.
about, that because we both occupied that space of highly masculine, and
Mhm.
neither of us even liked men. So this idea that we
Right.
just loved men so much
Right.
that we wanted to emulate them, I mean, that just wasn't the case. And in fact, quite the opposite. Because I disliked men so much, I was always embarrassed by how masculine I was.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then, so to have to feel that kind of shame and embarrassment, to be rejecting those masculine aspects of myself because I didn't like men. And then you go into these lesbian spaces where they're saying, you're too manly for us.
Yes.
These were the kinds of social challenges, or being bashed on the street because I wore my sexual orientation on my sleeve at all
That's
times,
right.
because I was just so gender nonconforming. I could never hide the fact that I was a lesbian. So highly effeminate gay men or highly masculine lesbians tend to take the brunt of homophobia because we
That's
are
right.
just so visibly gay
Yes.
in the world.
No, you make some great, a lot of very much parallels towards you and I, though we have an age difference and a transition difference. I dealt with the same. I was a very masculine female, and I'll be honest with you, I took a lot of the same. I got beat up, physically beat up here in West Hollywood, calling me die, calling me all those. So people need to understand that these roles that everything feels like it's a role playing. It just always does.
Yeah.
And when you're naturally a very masculine girl, on a lot of levels, you're not encouraged to still be that masculine girl. You are a lot of times told to calm down or don't be so masculine. You won't get so much hate, and you're not encouraged to be. And so, what I'm trying to say is, moving fast forward to today, I think that's why there's this huge influx, not 100% why, but partly why there's this huge influx of young girls who might be more masculine leaning, wanting to be more boyish because it's easier just to say, "Oh, that's a boy," than it. And I want to say this real quick here. When I transitioned, my father had a hard time with me being a butch female. I was very ultra
Mine too.
butch, shaved head, tattoos, piercings, like just that butch, like crazy man. Like, and my dad would be so embarrassed with me. I would not be able to go to family functions. I would not be able to come around the family. I was not introduced to people. I was ostracized. So when I transitioned, there was that sort of space where I was still ostracized, but I was growing into becoming more, for a lack of a better word, normal. And so my dad could, he had a hard time with losing his daughter, but seeing me more as his son, I think over time he started to see how people reacted to me when we would go out places, and they would just see me as a dude. And I think that really made my dad feel um, less sort of about himself, because it was about himself and his own fear of people maybe saying things to him about his butch daughter. So
Mhm.
people saw his son. It was easier. And my dad eventually did say to me, I just want to tell you this, that in your transition, it has been easier for me to accept you as my son than as my lesbian butch daughter. And that is a really hurtful statement that I don't think he realizes, that hurt my feelings a lot, because it wasn't that I was doing any of this for him, but he took all of his own prejudice and all his own fears and all his own things, and he really put it on me. And I think that I felt that on some level. Not to say that that's one of why I transitioned, but I wouldn't doubt, as an older person now, more mature and understanding my transition, that I wouldn't doubt some of that stuff affected my sort of desire to put myself into a more male space. If does that make sense?
It makes total sense. My dad is the same way, and
Oh,
I mean, I've always understood myself as when I started taking testosterone. I mean, because I
yeah,
was always hovering on that ambiguity. People didn't always know how to read me. I mean, depending on how sensitive they are to picking up,
yeah,
the
that's
visual
right.
cues. Some would see me as male, some would see me as female, some had no
Yeah,
idea how to clock me. And
yeah,
that I think people have a harder time with gender nonconformity than they do
that's right.
homosexuality itself. Like the sexual orientation part, I think we've achieved a great deal of societal acceptance, but the gender
Yeah,
nonconformity part is the part that tends to make people really uncomfortable. My family was always very uncomfortable with that. Um, I mean, in our day, the only women that were transitioning were those that were in that space of being highly gender nonconforming. The butch
that's right.
lesbians, you know, because we were the brunt of a lot of that homophobia, the butch
Mhm,
lesbians took testosterone just to kind of nudge their masculinity along into male passing, just to get through their day without that
mhm,
harassment.
mhm.
But I've always retained my awareness of the fact that I am a male passing butch lesbian.
Great.
Taking testosterone does not magically change my sex. It doesn't magically change my sexual orientation. So I mean, I haven't gone through life. That's what trans man meant to me, and
Yeah.
so I haven't gone through my life announcing to everyone, hey, demanding that they call me she, her, and ma'am, because then I
Ma'am.
would just look like one of the idiot trans activists. But
Totally.
'cause that
It's
would be
ma'am.
that would be disruptive, right? Because
Yes.
the visual cues need to
Yes.
match. I just
Yes.
people just I never demanded that anyone call me anything. It just when I started to build pass, people just naturally started calling me he, him. It was never something I demanded of people. That's just what comes out of their mouths.
Yes.
But yeah, my when in the public conversation, I have been saying, yes, I'm a male passing butch lesbian, which is just
Yeah.
a fact. That's just who I am. My dad absolutely hates that. He is so angry and concerned
Totally.
for me that that's what I'm saying because he really needs to see me as a man.
There you go. Because it becomes about them, right? And it really, I learned a lot, really becoming much more close to my family and my father. And really, I started to learn more about my father and his background and where he comes from and the abuse he had, and how, I think they call that generational trauma. And I started to see the sort of things he had to deal with as a young boy, and the masculinity that was shoved on him at an early age, and how he was demanded to be this way. So all these sort of socialized ways of being. And my father, not that this really matters, but my father's Canadian too. He was raised in Winnipeg, and that being said, his father was actually from Scotland, and there was this really an alcoholic, a raging alcoholic. So there was all these variables that I'm learning through, my father. I don't in any way, shape, or form hold my father accountable for any of this stuff. I feel that it was generational trauma, and he was just vomiting all of his learned behavior onto
Mhm.
me. It's up to me to change that generational trauma for as
Yeah.
I have adopted kids, and sort of not putting that stuff on to my children, and also having these beautiful open conversations like you and I are having. People can hear it, and hopefully some
Mhm.
people can take away, if they're maybe adding these layers of sort of stuff onto their own children, like you can't wear those pants because you're a girl, or right, or you can't call yourself Sam if you're a girl, or you can't have a
Yeah.
boy name, right? I had a boy name when I was a girl back in the day. So all those things are just so insane to me, that we put such stress on young people, when all young
Yeah.
people want to do on some level, right, is sort of play with things and
Yeah.
learn things and be things.
Yeah. My feelings about men have changed a lot over the last 20 years too. I mean, starting with that statement that trans men saying, "Well, I love
Yeah.
cowboys." It planted that
Yeah.
seed in my head that we are allowed to like men, because my man
Yes.
hating was so reinforced
Yes.
by lesbian circles. So when I transitioned and I was changing some of the social
Yeah.
spaces in which I occupied and interacting with men more, I saw a very different side to them. But that
Yeah.
was a big hurdle for me. I really had to address internally.
Mhm.
The more I was seeing, my own face in a mirror appearing male, the more I was male passing. I really had to address
Yeah.
my feelings about men and
Yeah.
interacting with men, and the ways they started changing how they were interacting with me. I started to see things from their perspective more,
Right.
and was in sharing space with them and seeing a very different side of them.
Hmm.
Sometimes the worst of them. Sometimes, when you get men in a room without any women in the room, they sometimes the worst of them comes out, and
Yeah.
the way they speak about women is
Oh,
can be awful.
disgusting.
So
Totally.
I'm selective about the kinds of men that I allow in my life, but
Great.
I saw a side of men, again, when we put a group of men, a certain type of man in a room together, and they're talking. I also saw some of that armor that they wear in public fall off of them in private,
Right.
and seeing their vulnerability, seeing. So I was give you an example. I was part of a small church group of men,
Mhm.
and some of it was Bible study, but the most of the point of that circle was to just support one another, to hear one
Mhm.
another, to open up. And I saw these men be vulnerable, to be emotional, to be sensitive, to really love and support one another. We were there to
Mhm.
ask for mentorship, and to be open about aspects of ourselves that we were maybe hard to talk about, that we maybe
Mhm.
didn't, that were maybe things that we were struggling with.
Mhm.
So we were there to just love and hear and support one another. And I'd never experienced that from men before.
Mhm.
I'd never experienced that gentleness and that vulnerability of men, and
Right.
listening to them and listening to how much they actually loved their wives. I never heard them say anything awful
Yeah.
about their wives. They really loved their wives and were asking for support. It's like, how can I show up as a better husband to my
Mhm.
wife? Those
Mhm.
were the kinds of conversations that we were
Right.
having, right? Is how do I be a better human being? How do I develop more empathy? Our church was actually encouraging men to be a part of the children's ministry to develop more empathy in
Yeah.
men, right? So
Yes.
these are the kinds of men that I invited into my life and felt a sense of brothership with, and saw such a different side to them, that men are not
Yes.
as one-dimensional as I once believed, that they have a lot of depth,
Yes.
and are capable of being loving and open and emotional.
Yes.
Um,
They're not
so that was
encouraged. They're not.
Yes.
They're not. I will say the same, but mostly the men I hung out with and still do are mostly gay men. But men are men. I don't care about their sexual orientation. They're still very socialized, right? We know this. Don't cry, man. I mean, I was taught that as a young girl. Don't cry. You can't cry. I was taught these sort of on some level male behaviors, right? And you have to beat up the boys. You have to. So I ended up being that girl who was beating up the boys in school, right? You have to be this sort of way of being, which is a more masculine way of being, and you can't be sensitive, and you can't be. But as I also grew into being a man, and I'm still a very emotional person. I think as I became more of a man, I became more emotional, if that makes sense. I
Yeah.
felt okay for myself to cry, where I didn't feel that way as a masculine woman. I felt embarrassed to cry, whereas it's weird because I sort of flipped the narrative for myself. But as I got around more men, and I actually did one of those kind of circles where I was invited in to come and be vulnerable in this circle, and every single man in this circle cried and said things that were so vulnerable and so in a safe, what we call, I hate that word, that term, safe space now, but that safe space. And every single one of them said that they've never felt able to let themselves be emotional, and because it was not masculine. And I learned so much from that circle of men, and really formed a bond with these men that said to me, we have to be more compassionate towards men. They are not given this space to be this way. And
Yeah.
if it's true, so everything you're saying, I
Yeah.
100% relate to.
I was used to women talking like that, right? I was used to,
Yes,
especially
yes,
in lesbian feminist spaces,
yes,
to for women to be talking about how that resentment of we don't want to be put in a box, that we,
yes.
that as women we don't owe you femininity, right? We don't
That's
have to just
right.
wear dresses and have long hair and be submissive and blah blah blah.
That's right.
So I was used to women talking like that,
Yeah.
and there seems to be an assumption among in those circles that it's men imposing that upon them. But it was interesting because then you shift into men's spaces, and the men were all talking about we don't want to be put in a box either,
That's right.
right? We
That's
don't
right.
want to always have to be the strong one. We don't want to always have to be the provider. We don't always want to have to be the protector.
Yes.
And they felt that the women were imposing that upon them. They wanted to be more sensitive. They wanted more emotional intimacy
Yes.
with their wives. They wanted to be more vulnerable with their wives. They wanted to be able to cry. They wanted to be able to have feelings.
Yes.
They wanted to be seen, heard, appreciated for the
Yeah.
sacrifices that they were making.
Yes.
And some of those men in my life, they've been. There's a video online, a song by a guy named Dax, Dax,
Okay.
and he's talking about that. He's talking about male depression and what it's
Mm.
like for a man to feel put into that box where they just are playing out a role and not allowed to just be to not have their hearts seen. And I've had
Yes.
so many men in my life slip that into my DMs as a way
Mm.
of because I'm a more sensitive man, and some of them know that I am a
Yeah.
lesbian. So they open up to me differently. And so
Yeah.
a lot of these guys are slipping that into my DMs as a way of expressing their feelings. And they tell
Yeah.
me that when they play that song with their wives, because they want a better relationship with their wives, right?
Hmm.
And they've played that song for their wives, or they've tried to open up, and their wives berate them, right? Their wives say like, fuck off, like, why are you being emotional, like, stop being a sissy, right? So it works
Wow.
both ways,
It
right?
does.
These
It
boxes
does.
that we live in, this thing that
Yeah.
we're calling gender, right? That's what gender means, is it's
That's
these
right.
societal boxes that put both men and women in, saying that this
Yes.
is what a man is supposed to be, this is what a woman is supposed to be. But men and women reinforce that in each other.
I agree.
And that's
I
something I
agree.
experienced with my wife too, because she saw me as a man. She
Yes.
wanted me to play the role. She wanted me to
Yeah.
be the protector, the provider, the
Hmm.
rock. She always called me her rock. She did
Yeah.
not want me to be emotional,
Right.
vulnerable, afraid, cry. Like, so she really pushed and reinforced that in me, that you need to be a man as
As a
you
man
know,
is supposed to be.
as a man is
Yeah.
supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
So
That's
so
right.
men and women reinforce that in each other, and I don't
Right.
think men are always understanding it from the female perspective. I don't think
Mm-mm.
women are always understanding it from the male perspective
Nope.
either.
Nope, not at all. Do you remember a long time ago there was this book, "Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus," or something to that effect?
Yeah,
There was a book, and I think I never read it because I just felt like that was kind of insane because I wasn't in this more sort of trying to figure the world out space. But I think it was trying to sort of show that men and women are different, but how do we sort of help each other, because when they say this, men have to be the rock, well, then you should want men to be vulnerable. If you want men to be the rock, that's how they become more of a rock, by not holding in, because eventually what's going to happen to that rock is it's going to crack, because
Yeah.
it's not letting out the steam, or not letting out, or not being, not, look, I don't care if you're a man or a woman or whatever your situation is. If you aren't in a space to be able to just let go, then you're not in a healthy space. And if your partner is holding you to these sort of ideas of what they want you to be, which I'm going to go back to my dad, how he wanted me to be, right? Because if I wasn't that way, he felt embarrassed about it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's such a really powerful conversation that we could really bring out to people. We need to start looking at, why are we holding people to these gender norms, right? I think that's really what the whole trans thing has become.
Yeah.
We've taken it to this. We've taken it out of mental disorder. I believe I have a mental disorder, 100%. It's not normal for me to feel this way, but for me to be able to feel comfortable and be part of the world and be very successful in my life, this has helped me a lot. It's like my insulin. If I was a diabetic on some level, it helps me move forward in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
And so it seems like that those gender roles that we're all expected to play are reinforced in how we interact with one another, how men interact with
yes,
women, how women
yes,
interact with men. Because I mean, like I said, these men, who were trying to do things differently and were trying to be more vulnerable so that they could build a better relationship with their wives, and their wives
yes,
shutting that down, saying, I'm not
yes.
open to that because now you don't look manly to me. And so they're only attracted to those men if
That's
they're
right.
behaving in a certain way and fulfilling those roles.
That's right.
Meanwhile, resenting the men that they don't have more emotional intimacy. So
But see, they're putting their own stuff on the man. And
yeah,
that's what I think is very important that we try to understand here. So people are putting their own stuff on their partner, on their child, on their, whatever, friends or whatever. And instead of like teaching people to look at, why was it so important for me to have a feminine girlfriend, and if she doesn't wear the high heels, and I was like that when I was a lesbian, like, if you don't wear the high heels and the lipstick, and I can't go out with you right now because I feel embarrassed. And
yeah,
now, as an older mature person, I can look back and say, oh, that was my own weird man thing happening there. Whereas today, I would never do that to my partner. Wear what you want. I don't care. That's literally how, you know what I mean? You can go with messy hair and whatever. Excuse me. I don't care. But I really think we're getting something here, Aaron, that really is a very big part of this situation. I don't think we're delving and telling, or sort of maybe encouraging people to look inside themselves. Why it was so important for me to become this man is a very important part of my journey, as well as yours. And why did you feel that you needed to become this male identifying person? And now all of a sudden, how many years ago did you transition?
20,
20 years ago. And
yeah,
now, in the last, how many years was it that you started to feel that you didn't want to be this way anymore?
just in the last two.
So, in the last two, something happened. Could,
Well, I think what happened. Well, lots of things have happened. I mean,
yeah.
one was just that last relationship I had, because that most of my relationships have been lesbian relationships. So
Okay.
that was the first relationship I had where she really wanted to see me as male, and so that kind of
Right.
opened my eyes, because that just wasn't working for me. It really opened my eyes to that dynamic between men
Yeah.
and women, that she. I'm not placing all the blame on her. I mean, it was it
Of
was it was
course.
both of us in this dynamic, but
Yeah.
it just from my perspective, because I can't really speak for her, but
Sure.
it like I said, she wanted me to be the rock. She wanted me to be the protector. Like, she just had
Yeah.
an idea in her head of what she wanted from a male partner.
Mhm.
And but then would also kind of start to resent me for, I wish we were closer. I wish we had more of emotional bond. So I said, okay, well then, I had some resources to kind of help support that. Why don't we
Mhm.
learn how to do this and learn how to communicate with one another so that
Mhm.
we are feeling more of that emotional intimacy. But when I proposed that to her, it's like, well, now I'm not. I mean, she didn't say this out loud, but it's kind of like,
Sure.
but now I'm not even feeling that attracted to you because
Wow.
what I'm attracted to is the rock, right? What I'm attracted to
Wow.
is
Yeah.
the man that meets these needs and expectations I have for men. So if you
Right.
suddenly become more sensitive and vulnerable, and we're talking in this more emotionally intimate way, she felt really uncomfortable with that,
Wow.
and
Did
you
she
know,
identify as a lesbian or as a straight woman?
bisexual.
Bisexual, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
So it's just interesting. Like it's because we both loved each other. We both wanted to
sure.
connect on that more emotional level. But as long as two people are playing out a role and reinforcing that in each other, like you can't expect me to be the rock and subject me to. I mean, I won't get into the what was
Yeah.
happening, but there was a situation with her ex where he was very abusive and aggressive and stalking
Mm.
us and blah blah blah. So
Wow.
the rock in that situation
Yeah.
is me being the protector in that situation to protect her and the kids from a very aggressive dude.
Right.
You can't expect me to be the rock and put myself in these really dangerous situations where I'm being threatened with physical violence and I need to sacrifice some of my sensitivities if you're going
Mhm.
to throw me into that situation. So you can't expect me to be the rock on one hand and also be warm and vulnerable and emotional on the other hand, that because
Of
those
course.
two just can't coexist. So I think a lot of men get so I see it from a male perspective that that we're
Right.
always sort of beating men over the head by how kind of macho or emotionally unavailable they are.
That's right.
But
And
that's
that's
also
right.
what society expects of them, and that's often what their wives expect of them,
That's right.
and
That's right.
berate them if they try to do anything differently. So both men and women play a role in that, and somebody has to make the first move to change that. But if every time one partner takes a step to change that, the other one is berating them and shutting that down and rejecting them.
Well, there's the crack. There's the crack in
Yeah.
the. It's hard to have a relationship. Let's just be honest. It's not easy. You have to compromise. There's compromise. If you're not compromise, there's no one's going to get everything, and no one's going to. You got to find that middle ground space, and you have to be willing to be honest. This is one of the things why I feel like I have the most solid relationship I've ever had in my whole life, because we are willing to say things that before in our other relationships we would never have said before. But we realize if we don't have these conversations, and we actually go to counseling once a month or whatever, just to sort of freshen ourselves up, if that makes sense, and to be able to say these things with a mediator there, but to say things that I'm so embarrassed to say, but after it comes out, it's like, oh my god, you thought that, or this is. But I think what I'm trying to say here is, if we don't encourage each other in partnerships to say the things that might hurt each other's feelings, but then to trying to find that common ground there, but also to take responsibility for our own feelings.
Yeah.
We're not taking a lot of times we're just not taking responsibility, not just relationship wise, but just in life and in general. And if and I think I'm going to go back to you, for lack of a better thing, detransitioning. It's your life, and if you feel that this just is not working out for you, and you as an adult feel like it's going to be better for you to be this certain way, I don't understand why people um get so mad about it. I don't get understand why people take your journey on to such a more, they take it on personally as if it's affecting their lives. Because I see some of the comments, Aaron, and I know that some of these hardcore, I don't know, are they feminist? I don't even know what they are anymore. This is ridiculous behavior. But some of these women, mostly women, I don't see any of the negative comments coming from men, but just some of the things they say is just kind of, what? First you hate trans men, and you call us this, and then when the trans man is like, well, actually, I'm going to go back to living as a woman, you're going to pound them again. So this person isn't taking responsibility for their own stuff that's coming up around your detransition. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not sure to what extent detransition at this point is even realistic. So that's why
that's right.
I don't really call myself a detransitioner. I am
Great.
always going to be male passing. This isn't reversible.
Great. Thank you for
Um,
saying that. Thank you.
without major medical interventions, it would basically be identical to a man transitioning to a woman. For me, at this point, it would be a
Yeah,
whole other transition. I'm not giving any
that's right.
more of my time to
Great.
medicalization.
Excellent.
I'm always going to be male passing. So socially, that is always going to be an aspect of my reality. As long as people, I mean, we talked about the eyes and ears last time. As long as people are
Yeah.
reading me as male, I'm just going to kind of roll with that for the most part.
Go on.
But you know, but I am taking more ownership of the fact that I'm a male passing
Yeah.
lesbian.
That's right.
So that's where I'm settling, is just in that language and in that reality.
Hmm.
I never want to be in a relationship ever again where somebody sees me as a man and expects me tries to put me in that man box, right?
Excellent.
I want to be able to show up as myself. So even though I'm male
Excellent.
passing, I want them to understand that I'm a male passing female.
Because you
Um,
are. So am I. So am
Absolutely,
I. I just,
absolutely.
I just am in my transition, if that makes sense. We're literally the same person. You're just having a different conversation. Of course, my wife and I are lesbians. Let's
Yeah.
just be real. We laugh about it all the time. People see us as this straight heteronormative. I'm like, if they even knew. I mean, I kind of find it quite funny. I'm like, we're leses. Who cares? Let's park the U-Haul out front. Like, let's just play into this because we don't care, if that makes
No.
sense. And I don't think you care either. And I think that comes back full circle to what I keep trying to say is that you full on take responsibility for yourself, Aaron. And I think that is the most powerful part of who you are today. And I think maybe going through that transition and living as a man and seeing all those things has really given you a much wider view of the world and gender and transition and all the roles we play and all the insanity we do. It's
Mhm.
like a theater. It's
Well, I'm a
literally
lot less angry. I mean, I'm a lot. As a lesbian separatist, I was angry, like because
yes,
of my dislike of men, and
yes,
I'm so much more comfortable in the world because I have seen things from more of a male perspective. I
yes.
see them as more multidimensional. I
Great.
understand what drives some of their behaviors, right? I
Yes,
don't think a lot of, especially lesbians, we never really have to understand men. I mean, it's easy for it because we're not
that's
in
right.
relationships with men. We're
That's
not
right.
developing any emotional intimacy
Yes,
with a male partner. It's easy for lesbians to just split off and only hang out with other women and hold this anger and resentment towards men without ever really understanding them on a deeper level.
great.
I probably never would have if I continued to live as a lesbian. It's actually been a gift of my transition. It's
Yes,
because it kind of forced me to address that and get to know men on a deeper level, to understand beyond just that facade of kind of macho man that I always hated and resented, to
mhm,
actually get to know them well enough to understand what's behind that, and to
yeah,
understand them on a deeper level, and to see that when situations in their lives change or when they're in different environments, that macho-ness sheds off, that it's an armor.
yeah,
And when you see that you see behind that armor. Yeah,
yeah.
so I just developed a lot more appreciation for men and became
Mhm.
very close to some men. Like I said, I'm selective. I don't hang out with people I think are assholes, but I I
That's
I really
age.
I,
That's age. That's
yeah.
not gender.
So I move through the world with a lot less anger and resentment, because
Yeah.
now I'm not angry at 50% of the population.
Hmm. That's
But
right. I
I
mean,
wanted
yeah,
to segue into, because you said you're still a
yeah,
lesbian, I'm still a lesbian. I
yeah.
mean, I don't go to the grocery store saying that to everybody, but
It's not.
I absolutely know that that is who I am. That is my reality. So I want to
Yeah.
tell you about a project that I just launched, because
Oh,
we're
great,
probably close to
great,
wrapping up here. So, I
great.
mean, we met when I first launched the Gender Dysphoria Alliance. Um, and the purpose of the Gender Dysphoria Alliance was to educate about what gender dysphoria is.
Mm.
Um, because that's not something most people understand. We have
That's
a
right.
political narrative about what trans is, and that is what's informing most people about the trans experience. But
Hmm.
that is quite different from what the evidence says gender
Hmm.
dysphoria is. And I
Sure.
think it's important, especially for those of us who experience it. It's important for us to understand ourselves and that experience, and what that is. So that was our primary mission with the Gender Dysphoria Alliance.
Yeah.
We worked with researchers, we had advisors on our
Great.
board to make sure that the information we were providing was evidence based.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure you remember early in your transition, you probably remember there weren't many trans men back then. It was
Nope.
primarily trans women.
Yep.
right? Historically, that was the case.
Yep.
Historically, it was, roughly 85% of those that were transitioning were heterosexual or bisexual men. And then the second largest group, which was, still a drop in the bucket, were highly effeminate gay men
Mm-hmm.
who just felt
That's
like,
right.
who had felt a sense of incongruence and just felt their lives would be easier if
Yep.
they passed as women.
Yep.
And then the smallest drop in the bucket were the butch lesbians,
Mm-hmm.
who, with some similarities with the effeminate gay men, just felt like if I just take testosterone
That's
and
right.
nudge my presentation, just tip it over the edge to male passing, my
Yep.
life is going to be easier. But there weren't many of us in those
Mm-hmm.
early days. So it was mostly 85% the heterosexual, bisexual men
That's
transitioning
right.
to trans
Mm-hmm.
women. Because they were the majority, this whole system and this whole political narrative really is catering to their needs. They
Mm-hmm.
held the vast majority of the balance of power in
Yeah.
this whole conversation, and in how the healthcare system has been designed. And I suppose that makes sense. I mean, if they're
Sure.
85%, it makes sense that the system would mostly cater to their needs. But the butch lesbians just kind of hopped on that wagon and were
Yeah.
carried along by it. But the system never really met our needs. It wasn't designed for our needs.
Mm-hmm.
That has really changed in recent years.
Okay.
Over the last 10 years, um, the number of lesbians transitioning has increased very rapidly.
Yeah.
At this point, it's roughly 70% of those that are showing up to clinics are girls,
What?
and most of them same-sex attracted, either lesbian or bisexual.
Wow.
So our
Wow.
system and our political narrative, which has been designed for those heterosexual men who became trans women, that needs to change, because now 70% of those that are transitioning are
Wow.
same-sex attracted girls. The system needs to be redesigned with their needs in mind.
Agreed.
And the political narrative needs to be, that balance of power needs to change, because
Agreed.
this system, you can't put 70% of girls through a system that was never really designed for our needs.
Great. That's a great
And
point.
and part of those needs is understanding that there are different types of gender dysphoria, that there are different pathways to gender dysphoria, that
Sure.
the homosexual pathway and the heterosexual pathway are two
Mm.
completely different things,
Mm.
and we have different needs.
Mm-hmm.
And we need, especially within the clinical system, we need to understand that in order to think about systemic changes that need to happen in order
Great.
to better support the girls. Now
Great.
they're 70%. We can't neglect their needs, right? So
But why? But why? Why do you think that there's now 70% of, because when I transitioned, they hated me, dude. They
yeah,
hated me. They were like, they literally called me a traitor. So it really flipped. Now, are you going to talk about AGP and
yeah.
HTS,
So
whatever?
those were the two primary types. What clinicians were seeing is in the clinics. I mean, these clinics originally were started to support those with intersex conditions. And
Great.
some of the identity disruptions, I have an intersex condition. Some of the identity
Okay.
disruptions that happen when you have one of these conditions, it can be
Mm-hmm.
confusing
Mm-hmm.
if your genetics in your body, and what we think of as sex, we could think of it as a cluster of things. There's your chromosomes, there's
Sure.
your genitalia, and those things with people with differences of sex development, those things don't always match, and that can cause
Right.
identity disruption. I had a
Sure.
lot of confusion. Am I a boy or am I a girl? What the hell am I?
Okay.
So the clinics were originally started to work with those with intersex conditions, and trying to determine when we talk about sex assignment, that came from treating those with intersex
That's
conditions,
right.
that when a
Yeah.
baby was born with an intersex condition, the
Yeah.
doctors had to consider what would be the best quality of life for this child, regardless of what their actual biological sex is, what makes the
Right.
most sense in
Right.
terms of their social integration and their self-concept.
Mm-hmm.
How do we predict that?
Mm-hmm.
When they move into adolescence and adulthood. So sex assignment meant that sometimes they would choose not the biological sex, but they would assign the opposite sex just
Right.
because of the nature of that specific intersex condition. They thought
Mm-hmm.
they would have the best quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
But then those clinics started to notice other people being brought to clinics. So it was parents bringing in highly gender non-conforming children.
Okay.
So little boys that wanted to wear dresses, was often very even physically effeminate, behaved in a very effeminate ways, and might say, I'm a girl.
Mhm.
Or so, and then likewise with girls, very, very, very masculine, tomboyish girls saying, I think I
Mhm.
was supposed to be a boy. So parents were bringing these kids into clinics.
Okay.
And and at that time they weren't medicalizing kids. They weren't they weren't labeling those kids trans. There was no concept of trans yet.
Right, right.
So when they just followed those kids over time, loved them, supported them, maybe give them some psychotherapy, work with the families, how was the family responding to that gender nonconformity? Was there conflict within the family? So
Mhm.
maybe supporting the family and looking at that. Most of the time, like roughly 85, 90% of the time, those kids just grew up to be gay or lesbian.
Right,
That
right.
sense of incongruence is a very common developmental aspect of homosexuality that
Yes.
typically sheds off once
Yes.
you're an adolescent and your sexuality develops and
Yes.
you realize I'm a girl that's attracted to girls, that means I'm a lesbian. And so
Yes.
then that feeling of incongruence gets integrated into a lesbian identity, and you just
Right.
move on and become an adult lesbian, or likewise
Mhm.
with the men. So that is what that childhood experience means.
Right.
Some of
Right.
us continue to experience that. We're very highly gender nonconforming, butch
Yeah.
lesbians, or highly effeminate gay men in adulthood. Some of us were still medicalizing as adults,
Uh,
usually just to make our lives easier because of homophobia.
sure.
But that's what that experience means. It's a part of the developmental
Mm,
psychology of homosexuality. It is very normal and common
sure.
amongst gay men and lesbians. The other population that clinics were seeing, well, before I move on to that, that's why they weren't medicalizing kids, because they
Mm,
understood what that meant, right?
right.
And they
Right.
didn't want to, when a 5-year-old is a 5-year-old girl is saying, "I think I'm a boy," they don't wanna immediately say, "Well, you're trans, and we're going to socially transition you and make you believe you're the opposite sex and medicalize you," right? Because they knew what that experience was, and they
Yes.
knew that chances are 85,
Yes.
90% of the time, you're just gonna grow up to be gay, so they didn't wanna
Yes.
interfere with that process.
Yes.
Um And that's why I don't agree with childhood medicalization.
Me either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these kids
Me
need to
either.
be given an opportunity to be gay or lesbian and
That's
just
right.
figure that out and be supported, and they need that education.
That's
That's not what the kids and families are being taught. They're being taught, "Well,
no.
your child is trans."
That's right. That's right.
So that's why with the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, we felt it was so important to educate about what these experiences mean from an evidence base. But like I said, roughly 85% of those that were transitioning were actually adult heterosexual or bisexual men. And you and I both saw that, right? I mean, we were both in the
That's
community
right.
in the early years, so
That's right.
this isn't, the
It's
activists
not
wanna
new.
say, "Well, this is just a fabrication." Well, no, it's not. I remember it, right? And you
Yep.
remember it. Like, we were in the community in those early days.
Yep.
There were very few trans men. It was mostly, we would see heterosexual men transitioning to become trans women.
That's right.
So that's what the clinics were seeing too, of course.
Yep.
Like, if we
Yep.
were seeing it, of
Yep.
course, that's what the clinics were seeing. So they were seeing these young kids, most who just grew up to be gay or lesbian,
Mhm.
some were medicalizing as adults. And
Mhm.
then 85% were these heterosexual men who were very typical as boys.
Yeah.
They were fairly typical heterosexual men, often married,
Yeah.
had kids,
Uh,
often in very male typical occupations like the military.
mhm. Mhm.
And they were coming in middle age to these clinics saying, "I think I'm supposed to be a woman." And when they studied them, because they were just so two completely different cohorts. I mean, these men weren't kind of organically feminine. They were
Mhm.
very masculine, but had
Mhm.
this really strong drive to be the opposite sex. And
Mhm.
so researchers were seeing these two very different populations and
Mhm.
thinking, well, what's going on here? I mean, they're so different. What is the driver of those two things? So when they studied the heterosexual men, they had already figured out what it was with the kids. They're just
Mhm.
gay most of the time. With the heterosexual men, when they did research on them, they found, and this is a difficult concept to understand, but it's like for some heterosexuals, that heterosexuality gets turned inside out. So these men they look at a woman, they're attracted to her. They're heterosexual men, so
Yeah.
they're attracted to women. But for this small population of heterosexual men, for reasons we don't really understand, it's like a boomerang effect where their attractions to women get turned inside out, and they become attracted to the idea of being women.
Right.
And that's why
Right.
you often see when these men transition to become women, they often look they very much like their wives. They start to look like the women that they're attracted
No,
to.
it's so true.
It is absolutely true. They want to be the women that they're attracted to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that is called autogynephilia, or
Right.
AGP for short. We don't understand the why that happens. There seems to
Right.
be some correlation with that and autism.
Oh,
Yeah, so we don't know why that happens, but that's what's happening with those adult heterosexual
right.
men. So the majority of the trans women that we were seeing in the early days, that's what they were experiencing, was this, we call it an inversion, when the heterosexuality turns inside out and they have this really strong drive. We all know what male sex drive is like.
That's right. So,
When men, when men have a sexual target, they can
oh
be
no, they
it can be
lock
very,
on.
very intense, right? It's
Yeah,
like
they
television, very
like
intense.
totally target. But I was going to ask you, but what's the difference between somebody like that? Because also, I did work in the fetish in space, and I would see a lot of men come to who were totally heterosexual men, married, kids, blah blah blah, who like to dress like women
Yeah.
in a right, which we would call either transvestite or
Yeah.
cross dresser. Are they
They're
similar?
related. They're similar. They're
They're
related.
similar.
So in the diagnostic manual, in the descriptive part of that chapter, they explain that a little bit. So
Mm,
it's all a part of what's called transvestic disorder. But
okay, transvestite.
there could be a range. So
Right,
for some, on one end of that range, just cross-dressing once in a while, as a kink is enough for them, right? They
right,
can
right,
on weekends or
right,
whatever, they might dress up as,
right,
they put a dress on, and that's enough for them. And
right.
most people may never even know that that's what they do in private, right? Or they may go to parties and do that,
Okay,
some of the kink
okay.
parties. But on the other range of that is the clothing isn't enough. That the transvestic
Uh,
disorder is about the body, where the fetish is about having breasts,
yes.
or
Okay,
so it's anatomical
I see.
transvestic disorder, and that can
I
be,
see.
so what that can progress into is gender dysphoria. That if they have this, because of that, just that target-based male intense sexuality, when the
Right.
target becomes themselves as female, that can be very intense. It can overwhelm them.
Well, you can
And they,
see it, and you can.
yes,
So here's the next question I want to ask. This is great because I also want to say these people have been around, as you say, forever,
yeah,
100%. But in the last, let's just take 10 years, there has been a huge amount of these sort of more heterosexual transvestic disorder, more AGP-ish type people really coming to the forefront of the trans conversation, and even like to me adding themselves and making an umbrella and blah blah blah. But what I want to ask is this, because a lot of people will blame pornography. Okay, we're not going to get into the pornography place because it's just not going to be that today. But that being said, I do wonder if somehow, because pornography is accessible so much easier now on the internet, and that you can sort of use it. Pornography is a fantasy, by the way, people. It's literally supposed to just be a fantasy, and you're supposed to walk away. You're supposed to use it, and walk away, but people are getting so sucked into it because it's so available, so fast and easy now. I'm wondering to myself, as you're saying, these people who used to just get off on it for the weekend or going to a dungeon or whatever, but now are getting more wrapped up in needing to have it more 24/7. Is there a correlation of watching sort of what they call sissy pornography and this moving them into a more faster paced sort of, what would be the word? Like moving them in their fetish or their disorder faster and needing to sort of, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I don't think porn can create or
Not
cause that.
create it, not
No,
create it, but sort of, it's like an addiction, right? If you
yes,
maybe you can have a beer, but if your addiction is really there,
yes,
oh, then you got to have another beer. And if they're available to you that easily, you can
yes.
easily get into your addiction faster.
Yeah. So I don't think porn creates AGP, but
I don't think so either.
what pornography does shape our sexual responses,
Yes,
and
yes,
it's kind of like playing a video game, right? It's like
right.
we get this very easy reward from a video game, that when people have video game addictions, you see this
Yeah,
with a lot of kids with ADHD, where they become
yeah,
addicted to the rewards, the easy rewards from
yeah.
video games, to the point where
Mhm.
real life doesn't have rewards as
Yeah,
easily or as
that's right.
immediately, right? And so real life starts to feel, they become disinterested in real life because they're
Yeah,
not rewarded. I think pornography functions very similarly. It creates a
right,
sexual reward,
right.
and then people can detach, and it's also a reward that that's detached from the development of any emotional intimacy with another human being.
Well, that's right, and you can see that. I can see that, and what happened? That's what happens with addiction to anything. You disconnect and from
Yeah.
reality, and you just become sucked into your addiction. These people have been around forever. I understand that, but what I think is happening is that the heightened amount of more of the AGPs are happening. Something kick started it to become all of a sudden more and more, in my opinion, because I've been around for so long. I didn't see so much of this, and now it just feels like all the trans women, the majority of them, not all, of course, are just seem to be more on the AGP side of this. Seem to be more heterosexual, fetishy type men,
Well, men in general use porn a lot more than women do.
for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. Yes,
But
a hundred
but yeah, I
percent,
mean, I do think it can shape a very unhealthy sexuality,
a
right?
hundred percent.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
because
can.
I mean, that if you had sexual reward from dating, I mean, that's not as easy, right? You have to
No,
go out and talk to someone, meet somebody, and
no.
develop a
But
relationship. Whereas
also, pornography
pornography
was
just
not.
gives you that
It,
instant
well,
gratification.
pornography became so easily accessible. Back in the day, you had to go to the DVD store or the sex shop or to get a movie, and it became a much more of a thing, which I think sort of maybe made people not have to
And
be.
kids have access to it now, and
Oh
that's
my
not
God,
at all
everyone!
appropriate. I think
It's
I mean,
disgusting.
even some of the books that they're putting in schools now, I would say are pornographic.
A hundred
They're these
percent. I
graphic
agree.
novels of, if
I
we
agree.
define porn by showing sex acts without any emotional bonding or intimacy
That's
or
right.
relationship, that is the
That's right.
definition of porn.
That's the
So these
definition.
kids are seeing these graphic novels in their
Yes.
school system as young as
No.
like elementary school, that are illustrations of sex acts
That's
that are
right.
completely separate from any bonding, emotional intimacy, or relationship. So that is the definition of
And
pornography.
why would you show a child that? What does a child ever need to see that for? They don't. They just need to understand basic sex. I believe in sex ed because of
At an
pregnancy or your
appropriate
body.
age. Yeah.
Yeah, your body changing. But no child ever needs to see sexual acts. That is actually insane to me. So you're right. That is, I will be completely on the same page with you with that.
And I think that's scaring a lot of the girls in particular. Like,
Yes.
when they're in their school library, they're opening up
Yes.
these books that are showing kids, how to give
Yes.
blowjobs and stuff. I think
What?
it's freaking the girls out, and the
My God.
kids are actually dating a lot less.
Yeah,
They're
it's
having
true.
sex a lot less
It's
than
true.
previous generations. I think being exposed to pornography is freaking them out.
It's freaky when you're a kid and you see stuff like that. We all know it. We've been there. I mean, it's uncomfortable. You're like, wow, what's that? You know what
Well,
I mean?
I've heard stories of little girls bursting out crying, like just looking at some of this
Totally.
material, right?
Totally.
It's freaking them out. So that's
Yeah.
what I wanted to, before we have to wrap up, I
Yeah.
wanted
Yeah.
to tell you about a
Great.
new project that I just launched
Great.
Christmas Day, called the Bearded Lesbian Project. I started a podcast because it's mostly lesbians that are medicalizing now. So 70% of young people showing up to clinics are same-sex attracted girls. So I want to start developing some resources and having
Great.
conversations about better understanding them, their motivations to
Mhm.
take testosterone,
Mhm.
how they're developing their identities. So
Mhm.
I'm going to be just talking to a lot of them on this
Great.
podcast,
Great.
just to open up that conversation, because that, like I said, that balance of power needs to shift to the lesbians, because they're now the majority showing up to clinics. their needs need to be met. We need to better understand them, and we need to advocate for them.
Totally.
So that's what the focus of this project. The Gender
Great.
Dysphoria Alliance website is still up, by the way, if anyone
Great.
wants to take a look and look at those resources. I've broken down the different types of gender dysphoria. I'll leave that up indefinitely. But this new project is focusing on male passing lesbians. So lesbians who, for whatever reasons, took testosterone either in the past and stopped or continue.
Mhm.
And they're going to have a range of identities. Some are going to call themselves trans men. Some are going to call themselves male passing butch lesbians, as I
Yeah.
do. So there's going to, or the new terminology, sort of mask
Yeah. Mask.
lesbians. So they'll have different ways of labeling that and how they're understanding it. But that's what I'm going to focus on, is just talking to them about their
Great.
experiences and how it's
Great.
going for them, and
Great.
how the system is working or not working for them. And just I have one episode up now talking to a young butch lesbian. She early as a teenager thought she was a trans man, but
Mhm.
and started
Mhm.
taking testosterone, but now realizes, no, I'm just a butch lesbian. She said,
Wow.
I like appearing masculine as
Mhm.
a form of self-expression, but I am
Mhm.
a lesbian. And she's getting a lot of pushback
Of
for
course.
thinking of it that way. She's a TikToker. That's how I met her. But
Great.
she fully owns her biology. She says, I am female. I have no idea what it's like to be a man. I've never been a man. And is really holding space and ground for
Great.
that. I really
Great.
respect her for that she is holding ground as, I am a lesbian who took testosterone as a form of self-expression. I do like having facial hair, but I am a lesbian. And so I really want to support her and others like her to own that space, and to own their own identity
100%.
as
Thank
lesbians.
you. No, that really is so loving and compassionate of you. And I'll put a link to that in the description for everybody so they can
Cool.
support that website, because we need to have them have a space to be able to talk about this and not get such pushback from the community. That community
Yeah.
that is so disgusting and disrupt. I love that you use that word, disruptors. They are. They're disrupt. They don't want us all to coexist together. And it's okay to have variations of what things mean, 100%. But let's not get it mixed up between somebody like myself who really does believe I have a mental disorder and does believe I need to be looking this way. And I live myself as a male and I walk the world that way and I'm very comfortable, but I've never lost track of the fact that I'm still a female and it's okay.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, dude.
Me as well. I have
That's right.
never, I've always retained knowledge that I am female. I'm a male
Yeah.
passing with lesbian.
Right
That's,
on.
I've never changed my stance on that.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. So you're great. I really value your friendship, my friend, and I hope everybody leaves beautiful, nice comments, because that's how we're gonna make this stuff get out there. And thank you, Aaron. I hope you had a beautiful holiday season and
I sure did. It was great to see you again.
awesome. Happy New Year to you and
Happy
Happy New
New Year,
Year.
everyone.
Yeah, right on. And so I'll see you guys all on the next one on the Wednesday on the live. And thanks so much for supporting the channel. I do appreciate you all so much. Have a beautiful rest of your Friday, and I'll see you guys all later. Hold on one second.